to the Festival
of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement, getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on us authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Walter Clark Boutwell. That is, I write under the name of W. Clark Boutwell. I'm the author of a trilogy starting with Outland Exile. The other two editions are Exile's Escape and Melilla of the Scorch. These three are the trilogy that I call Old Men and Infidels. And it's really my attempt to write out kind of my thoughts about what would happen if the United States, a country I know fairly well, were divided by politics, and then which way would things go if one country became very young, that is, retiring everybody at 40, retiring, quote unquote, and the other country expected everyone to live and work and be fruitful until they were 170. I let that incubate for about 70 years and then picked up one individual in the young country who was middle-aged and dropped her into the middle of the other country. And she was immediately captured by another individual who was middle-aged. She was 17 and he was 76. If you live to be 40, 17 is kind of middle-aged. If you live to be 170, 76 is kind of middle-aged. And so the general arc of the story follows these two individuals, Melilla Ivanova Chu, and Jesse Aaron Johnstone. And their backstories you get really over the several books. You need, you get the information you need at the time you need it. So that when Melilla is captured by this rather hideous, she's never met anybody who's over 39, rather hideous, creepy, ancient, disfigured, bearded outdoorsman or frontiersman. She is freaked beyond all reason and spends the next 200 pages trying to kill him. he spends the exact same amount of time trying not to kill her. So this is very much a coming of age story for the Malila character. Hello, Monique. How are you? I got interested in this. Hello, Jessica, or Jessa Felton. There you go. I got started in this because of a conversation I had with a 10-year-old Ghanaian boy. I do volunteer medical care in mission hospitals on about 4 continents, and one of the countries I worked in was Ghana. And so to a certain 10-year-old group of boys, or a group of 10-year-old boys, about the most exciting thing they could imagine was a middle-aged white guy. And so I had a coterie of young admirers. And one of them sang the Ghanaian national anthem for me. Good afternoon, Natasha Fillmore. Very good to see y'all. And I responded, or he sang for me the Ghanaian national anthem, which of course is in English. And I responded with the Star Spangled Banner. And they did. And while he was trying to recover, I mentioned offhandedly that it had been composed during a battle between England and America. And he was floored. Hi, Ethan. He said, America and England have been at war? He says, well, yeah, but not just once, but twice. And our first war was our War of Independence. And we did another double take. And says, America hasn't always been? He says, well, no, we were a colony. We'd been a colony for 150 years by the time of our independence. Come to think of it, Ghana and America have both been colonies. And his response was, well, Ghana's never been a colony. Yeah, I was really sure about that because I was your age when I heard Kwame Nkrumah declare the republic. So the day before, you were a colony. No. Ghana's never been a colony. And I tried to sort that out. And my conclusion was that it was the age of the country, the physical age of the country. At the end of the Second World War, Ghana's life expectancy was in the 40s. And now it's in the upper 60s. At the same time, the average age has dropped from the 30s to the 20s. Average age of a Ghanaian is 22. It's even younger in other African nations, Niger being about 13. I've got socks older than that. So if you're a young country, what kind of mistakes do you make politically? If you're an old country, what kind of mistakes do you make politically? And that was very much what I was trying to set up in doing this series. And it was very much my creating these two individuals. And I tell the story, within 15 minutes of starting to conscientiously write this, I already knew everything about these two individuals. Their hair color, their eye color, whether they had freckles, how tall they were, and those two rascals scampered up my arms and into my brain and lived there rent-free for 8 years before I was able to finally write them out. So they're dear friends, but I've put them out to pasture, at least for the moment. By the way, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them out, and I'll try and answer them as I go along. So, like I say, book one, I don't know if you can make out, this is a a sea of zeros and O's, of zeros and ones. Many of the characters in these books are virtual. They're virtual personalities. And of course, we've had computer personalities um, hypothesized since forever. But Robert Heinlein has done them. Hal in 2001: A Space Odyssey. They're a common trope in science fiction. They still come down to two different flavors. You get a personality either because a computer gets big enough and high enough and complicated enough, and all of a sudden it sort of wakes up, or you get imprinted with a personality from outside, and you gain your humanity by becoming kind of a reflection of the personality that you were exposed to, which I think seriously is the only one that's likely to happen. I'm not um, a believer of the singularity in and of itself. At any rate, so we start collecting our personalities here with a malign creature, which is called Smudge, or the Presence, and we don't even know he's alive until the second book, which is Exile's Escape. Notice it's multiple exiles. It's not just Malila. Malila is captured and comes of age, really gets enlightened in the during, I say she gains her freedom in her captivity, and then she is recaptured by her homeland and used as a pawn in a political coup that she's not even aware of, and decides to make a break for it and get back to, as she says, where she can see the stars and the smile of a newborn baby. Because there are no babies in the in that people are have access to in the Unity, but there are in the what I call the RSA. So she now is trying to get back, and her take from Jesse has been, he's the biggest, hardest, strongest, most adept person that she knows, and she thinks that's the secret. And what she learns is what's the secret is forgiveness, is the ability to let things go. And so over time, she meets up with a girlfriend she thought was dead. They had been together as fellow inmates of a creche since they were infants. And a spy, an American spy, inside the Unity, which is that's essentially the East Coast. So her allowing others to fail and to be forgiven is the big enlightenment for her. Jesse is also running away from his past. He's been disfigured because his society disfigures people who have been responsible for human death. Not that he murdered them, but that he's responsible for their deaths. And so he's dodging his nemesis throughout the book. And of course, spies are dodging everybody they can. So the book ends with Malila finally getting to America. Of course, this whole thing supposes that America has been dissolved, and that there are Yeah. Wouldn't Bob Montgomery says, I guess if you haven't ever seen an old person, it'd be terrifying. It's terrifying to me every time I look in a mirror, let me tell you. Who is that old guy? Um, the war is coming, obviously. This is a metastable situation. And so Malila emerges to try and reduce from the jungle, essentially to try and mediate or moderate at least this coming disaster. And at this point, the rubber hits the road. Malila is working for the sentient plants that have kept the two warring parties apart, and Jesse doesn't trust them. He grew up with them and he doesn't trust them. So this is they fall apart because of this and come back. And the end of this is very much a thread that's gone through the whole thing, is that only those people who have been injured have the ability to understand healing. And this is an age thing. Nobody gets to be as old as like me without having been injured in some fashion. I tell people I used to drive a motorcycle. I've got the scars to prove it. We've all bear the marks of injuries, but it's only by bearing those marks that we earn the right to be able to help others heal. And so that's very much the thread that runs through the book. I actually took that from an Arthurian story called The Fisher King. And there are multiple varieties of the Fisher King, I know. But the one that I find most interesting is the one where the king and the knight going come together and do not ask each other for help. And then years later, they've both gone through terrible things and come up back and ask each other for help, and both are healed. So this is a very old story, as well as being, I hope, a very new story. I'd be glad to take any questions if anybody's got some. Very good. Natasha asks, why a post-apocalypse and not a fantasy? I've never been particularly drawn to fantasy. I enjoy reading fantasy. The problem I find is that I wanted to say something about politics. And the thing with fantasy is that, a miracle happened and then it goes on in a different fashion. Whereas politics, I wanted to, for this book series, I wanted to work it out is every step reasonable? And unfortunately, it's very reasonable to see an apocalypse occurring easily within the next century. I have it occurring in 2052, where I sincerely hope to be dead and gone. It's what's an apocalypse? It's where all the correcting factors in a society have been pushed to the sticking point, and then you add just a little bit more, and it can't take the strain and it falls apart. Diamond's book, Collapse, is perhaps a great example of that. Is they have we have all these societies, and Shelley's poem Ozymandias, two great legs, pillars, like pillars of stone in a desert. And the inscription says, I am Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look at me in despair. all the great always fall. Their inheritance is always given away to somebody else. Their empires are divided among ravens. So seeing an apocalypse is this is business as usual. So I'd like to. That's why I went that way, because I think it's business as usual, not particularly peculiar. Bob Montgomery says, yeah, there's even a lot of Americans that think the U.S. have been around for millennia. We're getting rather cranky and elderly as a republic. There haven't been a lot of republics that have lasted with one form of government. Remember, this is the second republic. This is America's second republic, and it's been around for 200 years and change. A mere drop in the bucket. And even at that, we're relatively elderly when it comes to being a republic. Moreover, the U.S. doesn't have a lot of things holding us together. We don't have a language together. We don't have an ethnic background to hold us together. In counting it one way, I'm a first-generation American. My mother was a foreigner. Counting it another way, I came over not quite on the Mayflower, but very close in 1634. When I was first doing the first book, one of my editors said, "Are you trying to write British?" Because there's so many Britishisms. Because my mother's Canadian, and so I had to go back and hunt down and extirpate all these British sayings that I grew up with, and I thought everybody knew. How to mend the generation gap now? Excellent question. And I think some of this may be self-mending, because we've had an atomized society since the end of the Second World War. Mom, dad, kids, no grandparents. And then dad was made irrelevant. So mom and kids, and dad's just sort of free-floating sperm donors. And now the fruit of that has been that you have this whole generation of kids who don't know how to behave. We may be going back to multi-generational households because of the economics. I think that would actually be good for us, to actually have men hang around and act like fathers, and parents tell stories of their own parents. Indeed, any concentration, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. I quite agree with you, Bob. There was another comment I missed, I'm afraid, but advice to a novice writer. This sounds trite, and I apologize for it, but it really works. And that is, the writer needs to write. I nominally said 500 words a day to write, and I stopped more or less after that. Why? Because I find I throw out what I push on. It's got to come freely, and for me, the first thing in the morning. So that probably means I'm remembering some of my REM sleep, my dreams. But I find that the house is quiet, the lights are down. I'm knocking out words. I'm listening to my favorite music, and the time goes by, and I discover I've written my 500 words, and it's time for coffee. So write, because you can't edit nothing. So it may be dreck, but you got to write it anyhow. I call it scaffolding. That is, how do you build a house? Well, you put it up, you put down a foundation, you put up scaffolding, and you raise the wall with the scaffolding. And you leave the scaffolding there? No, of course not. You take the scaffolding down. You take it down because it was merely there to help you write the rest of it. Editing, I really enjoy editing because it condenses. It really makes me solidify the story, and I'm much more careful in word choice, and I have lots of word games going on inside my text, which is of course lost in the audible stuff. But I'm having fun with word games, and just little things like that. I like Jesse. I have a chapter in the second book. Jesse Goes to Sea, and I write the first part of that chapter as if Jesse is going to get on a ship. He's got a duffel bag over his shoulder, and he goes up a gangplank, and he salutes the first officer, and they show him to a stateroom, and then he goes down to the bridge, which is the first indication something's wrong. And you then realize it's not going into the sea, it's going up in the air. He's boarded an airship. And it's not SEA, it's SEE. So Jesse Goes to Sea is Jesse Goes to Find Out. Yeah, consciousness is, Bob is saying, there's too many assumptions on technology and consciousness, which I quite agree. Exile is particularly convincing to contemplate. This is something Jessa Felton is saying. Exile is particularly convincing to contemplate yet awful to encounter. It is the unhealable fracture constrained between a person and a local spot, between oneself and actual home. Indeed, we all leave home. And as Thomas Mann says, you never go home again. Yes, we're all, well, as a believer, I always think we are in exiles. We're resident aliens. But in a human sense, we also never go home. My childhood home was 213 East Moreland Road, Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. I even know the phone number, but I can't tell you the addresses of the last 5 places I've lived. Helen Richardson asks, is this like a dystopian setting? I wrote it kind of to put a dystopian book setting on its ear, actually. Typical dystopian stories, and I refer you to like the Hunger Games, which would be a good one. The protagonist is a young female. She has ineffectual or absent parents. She's either been tossed away or the parent is there and is a ditz. And she fights against the powers greater than herself in a country, not in a situation not of her own making, and wins through to the end by pluck and determination. Malila is not a poor waif. Malila is top of her game. She's a hero in the Unity. The Unity, the ruling class, she's a member of. She's disdainful of everybody else. And yet here she comes, she's plucked away from everything, including her clothes, and winds up in the howling wilderness of a depopulated Wisconsin, and is hauled away by this, rather nightmarish creature to her. And she only survives because the nightmarish creature is trying very hard to keep her alive. Any real life examples you base the unity on, says Bob. Unfortunately, there are. The proper name of the unity is the Democratic Unity of North America. I would suggest you look up all those countries that claim for themselves that they are democratic countries, like the Democratic Republic of North Korea, the Democratic People's German Republic. Those people, those countries that call themselves democratic are anything but. And so I was very much imagining, what if you had some sort of big brother crossed with, of course, the big brother of 1984 is a computer entity. I mean, he does control everything, but making it, somewhat more up to date and more invasive, because technology is becoming more invasive. All the entire population has implants that tell everybody where they are. So one of the first things that Jesse does to Malila on capturing her is take out her implant so she can't be found. So for a chapter or so, he doesn't talk to her, and she thinks he's incapable of talking, or doesn't, that she can't talk. She's been not making any noise because Jesse just ignores her until he gets the implant out, and then he talks to her. Most common mistakes you see in a novice writer, not. I'll use an unlovely word, bloviating. You tend to take your enthusiasms and blow them up and talk about all the stuff you're interested in. I know that's why you write, to talk about the stuff you're interested in. But there's a writing axiom is you kill your darlings. I don't know if anybody has heard that. Just because you like something, it doesn't buy its place in the book. You've got to read this with the most cold-hearted understanding of where you're going to decide whether it earns its place in the book and moves the story forward. And if it doesn't, toss it out. Keep it for something else. I have, but don't kill your darlings, again, is what you would say. Jessa says, what other authors are you friends with, and how do you help with becoming a better writer? I started writing in an absolute perfect vacuum. And I've only really talked to authors, sort of in passing. I continue to read omnivorously. I don't have, right now I'm looking at a stack of about 5 books I'm reading currently. But the was the other part of that? The import of talking to other people is talking to them, communicating with, is the biblical phrase, iron sharpens iron. You can't sharpen iron with chalk. You got to sharpen iron with something that's harder than iron. So iron sharpens iron. So talking to other people who have been through this is probably the most important thing you can see. And certainly I'd be glad to talk to any novice writers. If you go to my website, which is oldmenandinfidels.com, it's got my email address there. Certainly if you leave a comment, I'd be glad to to get in touch with you. It is incredibly useful for a writer to talk to other writers. Am I going to write a fantasy series? Well, I'm currently writing, I started this series in essentially 2123. That's the beginning date. But it's had 70 years of falling apart. So all this stuff happens in the next few years, and that's the first series. What I'm trying to do in the second series is figure out a way where there's a reasonable way for America to come together. And so the Silence and the Gods is the next series. The I'm writing that all together. I wrote the first series very much one after the other, but the next series I'm trying to write for better continuity and to make sure that it's balanced and that sort of thing. So it's a bigger job, something I never would have attempted in 2013 when I started Outland Exile. I'm been told I have to say goodbye. I'll be here tomorrow, dispensing wisdom and a sage of the ages. And if you haven't had enough, come on back.